A chapter of railway connection Sydney and Melbourne begun to molten. Bats bring down corpse of the trees, affected downward by the warmth. On the northern large obstacle reef, 99% of infant verdant sea turtles, a kind whose sex is established by heat, were found to be women. In external commuter Sydney, the warmth hit 117F, up a cold changing knocked together it downward, to the family member cold affair in a neighbouring outskirts the next date. Scenes of a science fi Roman depiction a burned next? No, fare the at first days of 2018 in Australia, wherever year is in brutal shape. The environment framework is extremely facility and no weather occasion can be immediately ascribed to growing emissions, but all how is skilled present happens in a planet how is on one extent heating pad rather than the length term indicate. Professor Andy Pittman, the CEO of the ARC Centre of Superiority for Environment Endpoints at the College of New South Wales, says taking into account the ordinary heat has rising it is a no-brainer how the probability of the kind of warmth how hit Sydney recent 1 week has as well enlarged. It was a weather abnormality, but the likelihood plant a bit love if you stay at sea standard and cast a dribble in the airborne, and later slowly do yours way up a mount and cast the dribble in the air once again, he says. Same chances of the dribble departure high increases sharply. How's which we're making in heat. Time it is recording breaking how tends to do news story, scientists say it is the continuous run of hot days in the top 30s and 40s how causes the considerable problems for humane public health, and some lifetime. Public health officials in Victoria allocated the risk of heatwaves while they found on 374 more than human beings dead for an excess 3-day time in January 2009 rather than would include been anticipated had it been radiator. Down there has, yet, been comparatively slight invest in study in the public health effect of increasing maximal temperature. A document published in the magazine Environment Changing recent year told time by the government paper named for more attention on the region 25 year back, less than rather than 0.1% of public health financing with has been devoted to the effect of environment changing. Professor Pittman says Australia is yet to correctly believe the public health risks of a heating earth. He's not creature capable to cold downward at overnight, and in the days how pursue, how causes problems, he says. I was campsite in the dark blue mountains western of Sydney on Sunday overnight. It was on 30 degrees at stroke of midnight, and I could sense my cardiac race. Currently, how additional distress on my vascular framework didn't murder me, but it might include if I was 20 years older. Globally, it was the other or tertiary warmest, and cozily the hottest year in that down there was not an El Nino weather framework help shove up temperature future. Put else path, it is now heat out of an El Nino rather than it was in an El Nino fair a few year back. In East Australia, wherever the great bulk of the people lives, temperature were especially pressurized for year months, while in growth is largest potential to conduct to inconvenient or hazardous warmth. Few locations had rest of recording hot days and nights. More than rather than 40% of the largest densely populated country, New South Wales, written at low 50 days heat rather than 35 C. The city of Moree had 54 serial days of excess warmth. Through Australia, the recent 5-year were all in the top 7 year on recording. How's rather a remarkable alarm, the Australia Office of Agrimeteorology's Dr. Blair Trewin says. The additional power heating up the environment framework is as well creature thick felt in few ways. The bushfires time of year starts over rather than it utilized to, and Australia has already skilled savage blazes the time of year. On in the enlarged backdrop warmth, the is in portion due to a precise dry design in several areas. Precipitation events is downward for both of the southward east and southward west of the nation in the radiator months among April and October how as well has rather considerable impacts for farming since historic hows while they get largest of their inflows, Dr. Trewin says. The effect of heating on the planet legacy listed large obstacle reef, the just residing pattern apparent of area, has been so registered. Estimates propose on part its superficial water coralline was annihilated for bleaching events above the history 2-year related to enlarged water supply temperature. Future southward, the sea on Tasmania's east shore has warmed sharply, enterprising tropic kind to hardly top latitudes and overlapping in the extinction of gigantic seaweed forest. Several weather patterns include not modified. Down there is no testimony of variations in storm behavior or the rate of big hello and thunderbolt, for copy. All the comes versus a background of policy fight above how to gear environment changing. It is less than rather than a year with elder by the government members brandished a chunk of charcoal in Parliament to tease the Labour opposition, whom ministers charged of needing to see an end to the fossil gas production. The Malcolm Turnbull led by the government remnant devoted to a 2030 goal incorporated at the Paris Environment Negotiations, a 26.428% cut under 2005 emissions. It says it can cut emissions time shield the social and industry of superfluous cost rises. It as well points out how Australia is immediately accountable for slight more than rather than 1% of world emissions, although it is accountable for on 30% of the world charcoal trading. But domestic hothouse accounts liberated in the 1-week up Yuletide showed Australia's industry emissions include been on an upwards trace with 2014, while the by the government repealed carbon sequestration price laws, that require big industry to pay for its contamination. Emissions had fall in the 2-year the laws were in location. The newest forecasting in the accounts propose Australia will excess its 2030 goal except new policies are entered to detention the increase. Down there very isn't an reason how environment changing isn't real in Parliament over, Professor Pittman says. Thou d discover a pair of members of Parliament how say how, but thou d as well discover a pair who didn't trust in evolutionary and didn't trust in inoculating family versus illness. Same question now is how the scope of anxiety, and the activity by way or devoted to both of in Australia and at international level, doesn't match stick the scope of the issue.